Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over the remainder of the notebook, packages and modules, keywords and built-in functions, and getting help, and a few other things. So with packages and modules, we already looked at importing some of these. The terminology is that a module is a Python file, so some sort of file that ends in .py, like module.py. And a package is a collection of those files, such as the pandas and the NumPy packages. So with either one of these, we can import them. We just do import and then the name of the module or package, like the math package that we looked at earlier. We also looked at importing NumPy as NP. So that's importing NumPy with the alias NP. So it's a shortcut for using. We could also just do import NumPy like that. But if we do NP, then we can do things like NP square root 10. If we imported NumPy, then we can do NumPy dot square root. So that's the difference. We can also import specific things from a package. So you'll see this where we do from a package or module, import some function or class or something. So this warnings is a module from NumPy. Actually, it's its own Python file. So we can import that specifically if we want to, and then we can use things from there. So if we want to import a specific, say, function or variable, we could do things like this from math import pi, and then we've got the pi variable there, or the ceiling function from math import ceil. And then as we saw with, for example, NumPy, we can rename our imports. So if we're importing something with a really long name, we can rename it to something shorter. The one thing you do want to avoid with importing is these wildcard imports from NumPy import star. That imports everything in the library. And what it does is it makes the namespace difficult to understand. So once we've done this, we can use any function from NumPy. But if we do from math import star, now our square root function overwrote the original one we imported, and it just gets really confusing. So it's not good practice to do this. So for practice on that, try importing this function all close from NumPy and aliasing it as AC. That's a function for checking if two arrays are similar to each other. And then as we covered in the first presentation, try doing this Easter egg, import this. Okay, so next up, keywords and built-in functions. We already saw that there's a lot of these keywords and built-in functions. We've got some special keywords like none. None is just an empty variable. And you can see these keywords turn green and bold. Pass is another one that just does nothing. It's just like a placeholder in a function if we want it to be. We saw how continue can be used in loops or break. For so those are all keywords, and you don't want to use those as variable names, because as soon as you use them as a variable name, then, well, that one allows us to not do that. I think for some of these keywords, maybe not. Yeah, I guess it doesn't even allow us to change keywords anymore. But yeah, you want to avoid naming variables keywords. I think more importantly are the built-in functions. So you can, these built-in functions, we saw how they turn green, not bold in IPython. And unfortunately, we can overwrite those with their own values. So you want to avoid that, because then you might break something somewhere else in the code. And then there are a couple places with lists of the keywords and built-in functions in Python. So last couple things, getting help. We already saw how we can use the question mark symbol. So if we want to look at, say, Pandas data frame documentation, We can use the question mark, and that brings up the documentation. We can also just search for pandas data frame documentation, and that'll bring us right there to pandas data frame documentation. So one last way is to use the help built-in function, which prints out the documentation here for us. So those are 3 different ways to search for documentation. If we get some sort of an error, like say we try to index our list with an index that's not there, the easiest way to debug this, or let's say this one where we don't have a variable defined, usually the key part of the error is at the end. So that's the actual error, and then everything above it is usually trace back. So that'll be all the steps through the code where the error propagates through. So we can usually copy and paste or search Google for this last line. And most of the time, for common things, it's going to bring us to Stack Overflow. And usually the accepted or top voted answer is correct. So, you know, they have this person wrote a whole explanation about why this is happening with that error. So that's kind of getting help. And of course, you know, those are the first things to try: documentation, searching the internet, and Stack Overflow. If you still have problems, then it's time to start reaching out to your instructor or professor or other students. But before you do that, make sure you at least Google the error. Last thing is coding style. So we talked about a few things, but we didn't really cover much of the coding style. There is this PEP 8, Python Enhancement Protocol 8 standard, which goes over all the different style guide, official style guide for Python. So this is kind of like formatting and syntax and things that you want to follow. So if you have a question about how something should be written, that will cover it. We kind of talked about some of the things in here, like naming variables and functions, that they should be easy to understand. And variables and functions should be snake case. So that's lowercase with an underscore. And then there's a few other things in here which we'll get into more throughout the program. But one other resource you might consider if you're really serious about getting into Python programming or going to be using it a lot is the book Clean Code in Python by Mariano Anaya. Probably saying his name wrong, but anyway, it's a nice book on software engineering in Python basically, and best practices for that. So it's useful. And so that's the entire review. Hope you enjoyed it. So one thing you might try now is, so in the course, I think in the overview page and in the announcement, I believe there's a link to the self-assessment test. So now that you've gone through the crash course Jupyter Notebook and know how to use these things, you might download this self-assessment GitHub repository. So basically you want to download the zip file, unzip it, run the self-assessments, and then see if you can pass it. So I think the instructions are in there in the self-assessment, but I think you want to get 5 or more questions correct out of 15, I believe. So you should be able to pass that after doing this crash course. So if you want to just double check that you are looking good to start MSDS 600, you might download that and give that a shot. All right, I hope this was helpful. We'll see you all later.